Dial round the archives. When on the internet, that's what you do to call a podcast. I know. I'm a podcaster from Dorset attached to my sofa. My name's Andrew Trowbridge. Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 58 of...
Round the Archives.
Well, lots to fit in, so
Yes.
Let's get a shift on.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, here's the Summer Winos making a return. So Bob Fischer and Andrew T. Smith will tell us about their new book on...
Last of the Summer Wine.
Hello, it's the Summer Winos here, so that would be me, Bob Fischer.
And me, Andrew T. Smith. How you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. Yes, how are you?
I'm good. I mean, I was talking to the listeners, but, I'll talk to you.
All right, are we doing it that way, are we? Well, we're pretending there are people listening to us. We're sitting in separate rooms here, as a government guidelines specify. I've seen you for a while in the flesh. I mean, are you keeping well?
As well as can be expected, to be honest.
Good.
Retreating to the mental refuge that is home turf as much as possible.
It's our happy place, isn't it? It's our
Yes.
mind palace. It's calf in Holmfirth. So we should probably explain. I mean, we've been on Round the Archives before, and I think we chunted on for about 45 minutes. Then we probably
we'll try and keep it to a brisk 43 today, I think.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. We'll knock at least 5 minutes off that. So basically, we are two fans of Last of the Summer Wine, and is it 10 years ago?
It would be about 10 years ago, that we started on this journey towards where we find ourselves today. Yeah,
Quest.
About 10 years ago, as Last of the Summer Wine was coming to its end on television, I suggested to Bob, wouldn't it be a nice thing to do to sit down and watch all 295 episodes of Last of the Summer Wine in order?
I thought you meant on the same weekend, but we're still going.
We're still going, yeah. Well, we've managed to find a schedule where we're watching it pretty much at the same rate they were making it.
I think we're slightly slower than the rate at which it was first broadcast. I think we're actually lagging behind a little bit.
It has no bearing on how much we're enjoying the process.
No.
We're just incredibly slow when it comes up to writing our thoughts about it. Because what we said we'd do is, we'd watch it, but we'd also blog our thoughts about it as we go along.
Yeah.
Just be a bit of fun. And that has, it's safe to say, snowballed over the last 10 years.
Just a bit, yeah. So the blog itself is still there. It's summerwinos.co.uk. Cheap plug.
Nice one.
But I mean, 2 years ago, no, it's nearly 3 years ago, isn't it? It turned into an Edinburgh Fringe show. We went and did it live on stage in Edinburgh. Well, I say on stage, it was in the back room of Edinburgh's premier punk rock and heavy metal bar.
Where better?
Exactly. But we did it there for a week, and it was fantastic. It was like us on stage, dressed as Compo and Clegg, explaining why Last of the Summer Wine is so brilliant and why we love it so much. And then we did it.
Making a case for its sort of place as a document of social history,
Totally.
and trying to convince an international audience of very confused-looking people in Edinburgh of that
I mean,
fact.
some of them, quite frankly, had just come in because it was raining. But we took it on tour around the UK in 2019. I'm losing track of the years now. It was 2019, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
2020. And that seemed to go all right as well. So we've now turned it into a book. So the first Summer Winos book is out now, just called Summer Winos, Volume 1. Volume 1. It's possibly optimistically called Volume 1, 1973 to 1978. So essentially, what we've done, we've taken the blog, which was us going through the series episode by episode and overthinking it slightly, and we've expanded on that enormously to make a book out of it. So I think the early days of the blog, we used to write about 500 words, didn't we, for every episode, which is paltry. It's pathetic. How on earth did we get away with that?
I think it's safe to say we're not overthinking it slightly anymore.
Yeah, we were overthinking it enormously, because we've expanded our write-ups for every episode to about 4 or 5 times that length for the book. So I wish I could show this to you, but it's a huge chunky book.
It's the non-fiction equivalent of a paperback novel, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, quite.
All about our obsession with Last of the Summer Wine.
Yeah, so we've done the first 5 years of it. It's the first 4 series. So it's kind of like our analysis of every episode, but peppered with absolutely tons of sort of like previously unearthed trivia. We've got loads of audience feedback from the 70s, reviews from the 1970s, from newspapers, like bits and pieces that other people have spotted in Last of the Summer Wine that we hadn't, because we've got this little, let's call it a community, shall we, of dedicated followers on the blog and on social media that have pointed this stuff out to us. So we're both really, really proud of this book. And we thought, for the purposes of Round the Archives, what we do is pick out like some of our favorite things that we've uncovered in the course of doing Summer Winos book, Volume 1, 1973 to 1978. So do you want to dig in first, Andrew? What's your favourite thing to have uncovered?
Yeah, well, I think when we first set out and said, okay, we're going to watch this through, it was just a piece of fun. But it quickly became apparent just how much depth there was to this show and how much there was to talk about.
Yeah.
It is quite a remarkable series in that sense, not just for a sitcom, just for any British series. And also going back to the very beginning, realizing just how different the show was when it set out to what it became by the time, I was watching it in the 90s, or even when you were watching it in the 80s. And, a big part of that is during the first 2 years of the series, we have a lead character who's gone a little bit forgotten, I suppose, in terms of the popular culture memory of Last of the Summer Wine. When you think of the show, you think of Combo, Clegg and Foggy as the defining image, or possibly Combo, Clegg and Seymour, or even, Combo, Clegg and Truly in the later years of the show. But to begin with, you did have Michael Bates as Blaemire. And his character, as I say, was, a bit of a revelation. And, I hadn't seen those early years of the show properly. I dipped in and out, but I really wasn't familiar with who this character was. And I think in keeping with the tone of the early years of the show, I think Blaemire is more real than any of the third men to follow, in that, he's still the same kind of commanding mold as Foggy or Seymour. He still bosses Combo around. He's still the leader figure, but he's very grounded. You can easily imagine him being sort of a mate of your dad or your granddad. He's a bloke who lives a real life.
Yeah,
he's not prone to the
completely.
same flights of fancy as the other characters that you'd later meet.
We point this out in the book, don't we? Like when Foggy comes in series 3, it's made like really clear that Foggy's memories of being in the army and of being this kind of like trained assassin, this silent killer, are a complete fantasy. He's a Walter Mitty figure. Blaemire has similar stories, to be honest, of having served during the war in Burma.
But you believe them.
And set up camp in jungle swamps. But unlike Foggy, they're never contradicted. Compo and Clegg never call him up on them. So I have to assume that Blameyre's stories of his military heroism are all absolutely true. And he's quite a formidable figure, Cyril Blamire. He's definitely not to be messed with, I don't think.
No, absolutely
not in the way that you could, they take the mickey out of Foggy and Seymour. But not so much Blamire, I don't think. He's much more of a stern figure.
Yeah, and I think Michael Bates, who plays the character, is just superb in the role. It really is. And I think that's something that really hits home when you think that at this time on British television, he was known for being in 2 sitcoms. He was in Last of the Summer Wine, and he was in It Ain't Our Fault Mum, in which he plays Ranji Ram, who happens to be an Indian character, and we won't get into the whys and wherefores and morality of that.
We do a little bit in the book, but there's a fact that he did do that.
Yeah, and I think if you were a casual viewer watching those 2 series repeated back to back, I don't think you would ever suspect that was the same actor.
No,
I think those characters are so completely different. They are, an incredible testament to the talent that he had.
Yeah, completely. Because you pick out, don't you, a moment that you think is just like absolutely epitomizes the attention to detail of Michael Bates. Is it when they're walking past the cafe in one episode? Yeah,
it's a tiny moment in Pate and Chips in the first series, I believe.
Yeah.
And the trio, Compo, Clegg, Blamire, just walking down towards the cafe. It's a scene shot on location on film in Holmfirth. And the church bells chime, and Blamire checks his watch. And it's a tiny moment.
Yeah.
But that's either really fine improving on the part of an actor reacting to the situation, or some good dubbing. And I can't imagine that the BBC Radiophonic Workshop went anywhere near Last of the Summer Wine. So I'm going to put it down to really nice bit of acting there.
So basically, the church bells went off as they were walking past, and Bates thought, I'm going to check my watch against them.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just Bates checking his watch. I think he is thinking about the character. I do think it shows immersion in the character. Yeah, because Blamire is regimented and organised, and of course he's going to check his watch when the church bells chime, just as a matter of routine. That's just what he will do. And that is just a tiny, tiny little moment, but I think it is the moment that really does suggest just how much Michael Bates was putting into the part.
Yeah, which kind of leads us into something that I wanted to bring up, and it's this is my nomination, which is, I think Blamire epitomizes the kind of bleakness is possibly the wrong word, because he's not a bleak character, although he is a tragic character in some ways. But there's a kind of grottiness to the early series of Last of the Summer Wine that I don't think is present as much as the series trundles along, and it's very much it's the post-industrial Yorkshire that we see in the early series of Last of the Summer Wine. So the buildings are kind of covered in soot. It's quite a grimy looking Holmfirth, which I think that's why it was chosen, isn't it? It wasn't chosen because it was picturesque.
Yeah, it was absolutely chosen because it was on the bare bones of its arse. It was, it appeared in a documentary fronted by Barry Took, just before the series was created, in which he was visiting sort of working men's clubs and seeing how people occupied their time. And that documentary does show Holmfirth as a town, really struggling.
It's a working class town with a kind of, it's a working men's club with, shall we say, traditional working men's comics on stage, and it's a slightly down at heel working class Yorkshire town.
Yeah, because the industries are very quickly vanishing from the area. So you've got working class population and no work. And so that's why the series was picked. It wasn't because it was this lovely picturesque little town that it becomes and is today. It was chosen for its grimness, as you say.
Because it's an episode, isn't there? It's called The Changing Face of Rural Blamire. Where basically, I mean, the premise of the episode is that Blamire decides he wants a job. Because again, that's another thing we point out in the book, that these aren't people think Last of the Summer Wine is about old, retired people. And the point of it, certainly in the early years, these are men in their 50s who've just been, they're not retired. They've been made redundant.
They've been cast aside.
Yeah, they're kind of society's misfits. So Blairmeyer decides that he wants to have a job in this episode. But there's a really telling scene right at the start of that episode where the three of them are sitting looking out over the countryside. And I think, is it Compo? It's kind of waxing lyrical about how nice it is and how lovely it looks. And Blairmeyer basically says, "You have factories all over this. What's the point in having like glorious countryside when everybody's out of work? I'll build mills and factories all over it." And I think that's kind of where we are in 1970s Yorkshire when Last of the Summer Wine starts, and it's very much a reflection of all of that. But it's also worth bearing in mind, I think, when you watch those early episodes, again, you think of Last of the Summer Wine as being Sunday tea time. Like 6:30, 7 o'clock on a Sunday tea time.
Sort of between Songs of Praise and the Antiques Roadshow, and amongst all of those kind of cozy Sunday middle class BBC programs.
Completely, but the early series, which there are some references and language in the early series that kind of raised. We're men of the world, Andrew, but our eyebrows were raised, I think, from time to time. But then you look at it and you think, well, actually, I'm looking at series 1 here, which went out on Monday nights, 9:25 on Monday nights. It was a post-watershed comedy for the first few years, and it very much reflects that, I think.
And with that in mind, I'd like to talk to you about my next selection, which is whack, Bob. Can we talk about whack?
We've got these all the way through the book, haven't we? The word from the whack.
Yes, the word from the WAC, which in this case, WAC stands for the Written Archive Centre, which is a resource that the BBC has, where they collect all of the paperwork and documents relating to various shows they have. And one of the things that we're fortunate to have access to in the case of Last of the Summer Wine are audience research reports. And that's where the BBC would basically collect a sample of the viewing population and give them questionnaires to find out how different programs were being perceived. And so we do have sort of an overview of what the British public thought of Last of the Summer Wine as it was going out for the first time.
And it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about sort of the grimness, I'd like to quote from the archive report, the audience report for Shortback and Palais Glide.
Go on, I'm trying to find it in the book here. What have you picked out?
Well, first of all, 14.3% of the UK population were watching, which is remarkable. 185 questionnaires were gathered together to judge this response. And generally, the show was very well received. It was noted for having really true to life characters, good down to earth fun, a right good laugh. But the comments I'd like to pick out, and I'll try my best points of view voice here to quote.
Go on.
I think the series would be much better and still funny if the script was kept cleaner, some dirty marks which I detest. And to quote a second one, just to prove that isn't an isolated incident, very common, revolting looking men hope this is the last.
Which we should point out. So these are audience reaction comments from series 1, episode 1.
Yes.
Talk about giving it a chance. I love as well. I'm trying to find it here because we picked out some newspaper reviews as well. You diligently trawled local newspaper archives to find contemporary reviews. This is the one that I love. So this is it's from the Birmingham Daily Post. It's the 5th of January, 1973. So this is after the pilot episode. This is the pilot episode, and it's Terry Metcalf in the Birmingham Daily Post. It was a lovely little interlude, this tale of 3 old men, totally unalike but bound together by their loneliness and uselessness, who spend their days plaguing the life out of the local librarian. Hardly enough material for a full series? Unfortunately, I think not.
If only he knew.
Another 37 years after that. Everyone's a critic, aren't they? Especially critics. What else? Did you find anything else?
We could talk about fertilizer.
Oh, God, right, okay. Because one of the things we tried to do with the book is, I mean, obviously it is a book about Last of the Summer Wine, but we try and tie that in with some of our own memories of watching it as well, and you know, and being around our families at the time. Because I think, you know, for a lot of people, it was a program that they watched with mums and dads and granddads and what have you. And I just love this one. So it's the episode, it's Jubilee, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Which is series 4. And it's quite an unusual episode, and it's actually tied into a specific date. It's tied in with you know, Silver Jubilee week in June 1977. And it's Foggy by this stage, so it's Compo, Clegg and Foggy like volunteer to help at the local Jubilee parade, and they go around to the vicarage, and the vicar's wife, who, as an aside, is played by Jane Wenham, who in the 1950s was married to Albert Finney. I don't know why I like putting that in at every possible opportunity, but I do. But the vicar's wife comes out, and I must have seen this episode half a dozen times before I got the joke. But she keeps saying, the vicar is busy with a fertilizer representative. He was very specific about that, a fertilizer representative. So what's the significance of that? It suddenly struck me. It's a bullshit merchant.
Yep.
That is Roy Clark putting a bullshit merchant into his script. But
it's a nice, gentle comedy.
Exactly. But as an example of kind of how we've tied in our own family life with the book, that sparked you off onto a story which I love.
Yeah, just thinking of, you know, a fertilizer representative reminded me of when I was a kid. My nana had a run-in with one such fertilizer representative, knocking door to door, selling what I presume was horse shit rather than bullshit.
It's like a genuine fertilizer representative.
Yes, and she was under the impression she was paying for 2 kilograms of manure to go on the roses in the garden, and the next day 2 tons of the stuff was dumped in the front yard. And it's one of those things that even now I can smell it if I think about it. It is the image of this stuff lingering around for weeks and weeks. You know, various family members would come and, you know, with a shovel and take some away for their garden, trying to be helpful.
This is a sitcom episode in its own right. It's one foot in the grave, surely.
I think it was enough to smother the roses rather than encourage any growth.
The one I kind of picked out, because again, it's just something in Last of the Summer Wine that made me think of like my own family. Now, I think I'm all right mentioning this nearly 40 years on, but there's a scene in it's in A Merry Heatwave. Which is it's one of Roy Clark's Christmas episodes where nobody likes Christmas.
That's a theme that emerges very quickly. That Roy Clark does not care for Christmas.
Well, didn't we ask him? We asked him why all of his Christmas episodes were about how terrible Christmas is. And we met him a few years ago, and he was brilliant. And he looked at us and he said, "Well, it's the most miserable time of year, isn't it?" And you can absolutely see it in all of his Christmas episodes.
Yes.
So A Merry Heatwave isn't even set at Christmas. It's them trying to construct a false Christmas
for a dying man.
Yeah, to film for Nora Batty's brother, who's in Australia and he's dying. So they kind of construct this false Christmas for him in the middle of an August heatwave. But anyway, so the upshot of all of this is that Sid has got a huge Christmas tree in the cafe, and basically the suggestion is that he's nicked it, that he's gone down to his local forestry commission with a saw and come back with it. And he claims to Ivy, doesn't he, that he's stuck a £1 note on a adjoining branch.
Yeah,
he says so with a twinkle in his eye. And that just reminded me, there was one Christmas, and it's about 1983, 84, where I was kicking up a stink at home because we didn't have a real Christmas tree. We had this tatty Woolworths Christmas tree that had been there for decades. It had been there since the 3-day week. and it was falling to bits. And I was like, oh, can we get a real Christmas tree? Everybody on the telly's got a real Christmas tree. But, you know, it was the 80s and we didn't have much money. Both of my parents were in and out of work an awful lot in the 1980s. But my dad, clearly inspired by this, and this is literally, it's like less than a week before Christmas. He went out to walk the dogs in the woods near our house and came back with just literally turned up at the back door with a Christmas tree that it would not have looked out of place in Trafalgar Square. It was extraordinary. I stuck it in the front room and said, there you go, a real Christmas tree. And my mother said, where'd you get that from? And he said, found it. And then he went to put his saw back in the garage. So all of that there's loads of stuff like that in the book of how that's the summer wine. Again, you know, a reflection of British society at the time, I think, you know. It was absolutely. The 1970s, you had to be resourceful. The 1980s, you had to be resourceful. So, and I kind of, again, sort of linking into all of this stuff, Joe Gladwin.
Yes.
Joe Gladwin, who in many ways is he's the epitome of the miserable granddad, or the miserable older relative that lots of us had. But Joe Gladwin, who played Wally Batty, he's become iconic for the pair of us, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's the cult of Wally Batty continues to grow with each appearance he makes, he's a character. He doesn't appear in the pilot episode. He doesn't appear in the first series at all. But as soon as he does arrive on the scene, we just fell in love. Yeah, I think, and he's just quickly woven into the fabric of the show. He doesn't have this effect on everyone. For the episode in which he makes his first appearance, my partner Emma was joining us for that episode. Just
He's in the book. Yeah, we wrote up her replies and her responses to it.
Yeah,
she just can't understand us at all, can she?
No, and when it came to Wally Batty, she just said, you know, she described him, I think, as a bit bit boring.
Yeah, that's all he does. He goes. But that's why we like him.
Yeah, I think Wally Batty ventures so far into the territory of boring that he emerges from the other side as one of the great characters of British sitcom. He is unique.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary performance, and again, like we've talked about this. We did it in the live show, but we've put it in the book as well. Joe Gladwin drew on, I nearly said centuries of experience there. It looks like it. Joe Gladwin drew on decades of experience because he'd been a performer since just after the First World War, which is extraordinary. It's the bloke who was still acting on TV in the 1980s.
Yeah, but his background was variety.
Yeah, it began his career as a basically a variety performer in the aftermath of the First World War. He was like a stooge, basically, wasn't he? He'd do a strongman act where he'd dress up in a lollipop.
Yeah, basically, part of his act was he'd appear as the world's strongest man, and he'd end up collapsing on stage, obviously, because he's a spelk, and then be carted off. And then at the end of the show, as the audience would leave into the lobby, they'd see Joe Gladwin being loaded on a stretcher into a local ambulance that they'd somehow get a hold of. The last gag on the way out of the show.
It's just a phenomenal performance all the way through. Nobody has made hangdog misery more funny than Joe Gladwin.
And he's absolutely not just a character, but a face you do not get on British television anymore. I think that is so lived in. You know, he's the equivalent of, I don't know, like an old stately home, but a really knackered one. He's that lived in. And
if you just got away by yourself, then I could be on origin.
Sorry, Joe.
Do you know, should we put out our appeal here? Because we are genuinely, we would love to find any descendants, any surviving family members of Joe Gladwin. I think
just people who knew him well.
Yeah, I think we need to keep saying this at every opportunity. We cannot find. We've tried a few different routes. We cannot find any of Joe Gladwin's family anywhere. We don't know if he ever had children or not. We can't find any evidence that he did. I bless him. We've even been to visit his graveside, haven't we? And when we played Oldham.
Yeah, absolutely. We know certain things about his life. He led obviously quite a remarkable life. Jonathan Lindsley, who played Crusher in the series, got to know him rather well on location, and filled us in with some stories. We know he was a devoted Catholic. He was made a papal knight. Yeah. He was a patron, I believe, or at least the supporter of his local operatic society.
Right.
Which again, you think of Wally Batty, you don't think of Gilbert and Sullivan particularly, but nevertheless he was. So we know all these little things.
I just imagine him singing Nessa Dorma.
3 little maids from school away.
Yes, you Joe. I'm genuine. If anybody can put us in touch with any members of Joe Gladwin's family or anyone that just knew him well, we'd just love to share some memories of Joe and just to celebrate his work a little bit more, because we just think he's extraordinary.
Yeah, summerwinos.co.uk. Find us, send us a message, an email, whatever.
Totally, you can email us from there. So should we do a little geeky bit just to finish?
Oh, go on then.
Because we've kind of within the book, so we dug out lots of little bits and pieces and maybe bits of uncelebrated trivia. And this is one that, if you Google for Pete Postlethwaite, Last of the Summer Wine, you'll find all kinds of discussion on different forums and Facebook groups about this. So this is, it's the same episode actually, isn't it? It's a Merry Heatwave again.
Yes, yeah, it is.
And at the end of the episode is a credit for Peter Postlethwaite. And this is the man, lest we forget, that Steven Spielberg once described as the greatest actor in the world.
Well, Steven Spielberg had never met Joe Gladwin, so it's
well, yes. Can you imagine if Steven Spielberg had cast Joe Gladwin in something? It'd be E.T.
or the T-Rex.
Be Indiana Jones.
It belongs in a museum.
So do you. Where were we? Pete Postlethwaite. Pete Postlethwaite apparently is in the episode of Merry Heatwave, Christmas special. And we thought we'd found him because there's a scene in the cafe where Ivy basically is trying to get rid of a couple of customers. One of whom is quite a sort of lanky looking, lugubrious bloke, slightly balding. And he does bear a passing resemblance to Pete Postlethwaite. And he's got a line as well, which would be enough to earn him like a credit at the end of the episode. So we were within a whisker of putting this to print, weren't we? Oh, that's him. That's Pete Postlethwaite with one line in an episode of Last of the Summer Wine.
Yeah, it was believable. As we say, it was a passing resemblance, but you could believe that this was the man who would become, the guy you'd seen in Brassed Off. Yeah. Just obviously in between had a very rough paper round.
And indeed Jurassic Park. So we were just going ready to commit this to print and there's nobody else in the episode that looks remotely like Pete Postlethwaite. So that's him. That's because he would have been about 29, I think, when the episode was filmed. Something like he was a young man. So that's him. That's Pete Postlethwaite. And then I think was it David Brunt?
David Brunt, our go-to guru for anything archive related.
Who is just a brilliant TV historian, enthusiast, researcher, who kind of piped up and said, I'm not sure it is, I think it's...
I think he was putting it gently. He was actually saying, you morons. No, of course it's not Pete Postlethwaite.
It does look like Pete Postlethwaite. But it's an actor called... Is it Andrew Lane?
Yes, yeah.
I think is the actor, and he sent us. I mean, he said check out episodes of All Creatures Great and Small in particular, Andrew Lane plays a barman in All Creatures Great and Small, and he does. He looks.
It's definitely him.
It is. He looks just as much like the bloke in the calf as Pete Postlethwaite ever does. And he is credited as well as Pete Postlethwaite on the end of that episode of Last of the Summer Wine.
And obviously there is no other part that Andrew Lane could have been playing in that episode, other than the part he is very clearly playing, which is not the part that Pete Postlethwaite is playing.
But which leaves the conundrum. So if that's Andrew Lane, where the hell is Pete Postlethwaite in A Merry Heatwave? And we went through all kinds of possibilities. There's a cameraman, like a wedding cameraman that you don't see that much of. So is it him? But he doesn't have a line, so he wouldn't get credit for that usually. And in the end, we went back to the written archive, didn't we? And with the assistance of David Brunt again, and discovered that. Do we give the spoiler here?
I think let's hope they buy the cow.
Let's sell the book. So Pete Postlethwaite, who get a Hollywood actor, Jurassic Park, Spielberg's favorite actor in the world, and this is documented on BBC paperwork.
Jurassic Park 2, I feel the need to say before we get any letters.
Pathetic. Had his scene cut from Last of the Summer Wine. Recorded his scene, and the credits were made up with his name on them accordingly. But then just before broadcast, so somewhere between the credits being made up and the program being broadcast, his scene was cut. So he's not in Last of the Summer Wine at all. We can exclusively reveal. You'll see people on forums adamant that it is him, but we've got the paperwork. It's not. So that's the kind of ridiculously diligent geekery that you can find in the Summer Winos book. There's a few other examples of that. We were determined to find the identity of the bloke who plays Lewis Bickerdike in Green Fingers, who has a crucial role, but he's not credited anywhere. We've done that, but we're not going to reveal that to you. Should we put like a little teaser out here? Because we've got an absolute belter, haven't we? That we're both incredibly proud of this. And we take no credit for it at all.
This one that came to us through our community. But there is an actor who would go on to be part of the main cast of Last of the Summer Wine.
Like a huge part of the series.
Yeah. He makes an uncredited appearance several years before he was ever actually supposedly in the show.
He does indeed. Like for us, this was our worlds have never been the same since, have they?
And it's such a unplanned appearance as well. It's not a big deal in terms of production. I
think it's fair to say you've got to freeze frame it to be really sure. Which one of our contributors was it? Simon S.
I believe it was. Yeah.
Who was it? It was a contributor to the blog. He posts on the blog all the time, and said, "Is that ... on the bus in this episode?" You had to freeze frame it, and we still weren't sure. But again, we dug out the paperwork, a list of uncredited walk-on artists, background artists, extras.
I do have to interrupt there, Bob. I've just checked our own book, which we should know back to front. It was George Kempson.
Was it George?
Simon S. nine times out of 10 was the person coming to us with a comment, but it was George Kempson who found out.
I knew I'd get it wrong. I knew I'd get it wrong at one time. I didn't check. Thanks, George, and thanks, Simon. So I haven't seen this mentioned anywhere else, but one of the Last of the Summer Wine regulars gets an uncredited appearance in the show 7 years before his first official appearance. There you go. That's the kind of forensic level, pathetic sadness geekery that you can find in the Summer Winos book, Volume 1, 1973 to 1978.
Yep, you can pick that up at summerwinos.co.uk via our online store, Linky Things. And if you're really keen to find out the story behind that bit of trivia, look on page 117.
Is that it? Are we done? That's not been 45 minutes, has it?
No, it's not. I think they've got off lightly, to be honest.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Always a pleasure.
Many thanks to the Summer Winos for that.
Yes, and it's a very good book. Highly recommend it.
Well, I've been in the bath with it many times already, which is a sign of quality.
Yes.
In fact, it's even encouraged me to start reading the last of the Summer Wine novel, The Moonbather.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Right, next up, Warren taking a look at
Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
As a high seas party. This is known as a swinging singles cruise. I want to see this ship laid bare. You know why they call it a bikini? But a madman makes it a death cruise. There is a werewolf on board. The moon is full, and he's after Kolchak on The Night Stalker. Tonight's second feature on CBS Late Night.
In all civilizations and cultures around the planet hides an underbelly of darkness that shrouds the more mysterious occurrences throughout our history. Stories of dark deeds and superstitious notions that have been passed down from generation to generation, often embellished with the odd theatrical flourish. Some of these stories have been grimmer than a Grimm's fairy tale, or they've just served to control an uneducated and fearful populace. Like a modern-day conspiracy theory, these stories fire not only the fear of vulnerability, but at most stoke the dangerous of human instincts, curiosity. So, as a writer, you take this well-weathered concept, you give it a new coat of paint, and instead of having a clean-cut hero type to fight the monsters, create a social misfit, a wrangling hack of a journalist who cares not for the ordinary, but the strange, the macabre, the plain odd. A man who is often financially broke. We presume he lives out of a suitcase in a two-bit apartment in the down-at-hill part of town. He lives on TV dinners and credit. A man who has no understanding of sartorial taste, wearing the same clothes every day and insisting on wearing a raggedy old straw hat, clearly seen better days. You equip him with a quick-fire mouth and the unenviable skill of totally confusing people, interlaced with the ability to surprise and irritate the hell out of people in authority. And so you've just created an ingenious character. The American writer Jeff Wright created such a character in the form of Carl Kolchak, the not-so-ace reporter who worked for any publication that would employ him. The character was almost an anti-hero, bucking the trend of the all-American clean-cut guy who would fight the good fight whilst having the ladies swooning in his arms. You see, there was no way on earth Rice was going to pander to that expectation of his hero figure. Rice created Kolchak in the early 1970s and sold the idea of a TV movie to the American network ABC. Rice's original scripts were not accepted by the network. However, they did like the idea and the premise behind it, and so it was passed to veteran science fiction writer Richard Matheson to rewrite. The reporter character originated in Rice's unpublished novels of Kolchak papers and was set in Las Vegas. The newspaper reporter named Carl Kolchak tracks down a serial killer who preys on young women in the dark streets and abandoned nocturnal alleyways.
Introduce myself. My name is Kolchak of the Daily Chronicle.
Kolchak reports the bizarre, the supernatural, the unexplainable.
You again in another crazy story. This nut thinks he is a vampire. You know what I call that? Irresponsible yellow journalism. He has killed 4, maybe 5 women. I saw that so-called super killer wipe up the streets with your so-called police force.
They don't want any help from amateur bloodhounds like you.
Well, I've been a reporter for 22 years. I've been a police officer for 30. Well, then why don't you retire?
Each man in the field is issued one of these, and one of these.
Are you suggesting that we pound one of these into Scorzeny's chest?
No, into his heart. Darren McGavin, the Night Stalker.
Rice stated he wanted to create a city full of fear and uncertainty, basing his mysterious psychopath on the behaviour of Jack the Ripper. However, the twist, as it turns out, is the attacker is a vampire who raises from the dead to recharge his immortality batteries every few years. After the success of the TV movie, broadcast in 1972 under the title The Night Stalker, a sequel was commissioned in 1973 entitled The Night Strangler, and I think you get the general idea about what the storyline was. This time, however, it's set in the city of Seattle, as Kolchak has been unceremoniously thrown out of Las Vegas at the end of the last movie. Fueled by the success of 2 movies, Universal bought the rights and worked with ABC to look into producing a series. The ratings for the TV movies have been high, and the audience appreciation mirrored that as well. Initially, it was mooted there was going to be 2 more TV movies, but Universal wanted a series. After all, there's more revenue in a series. Only 2 of the original cast were approached to return. Well-known actor Simon Oakland was Kolchak's heavily put-upon editor, who often suffers from high blood pressure and stomach problems, usually exacerbated by Kolchak's erratic behaviour. Darren McGavin was approached to reprise his role as Kolchak, but it took some time convincing him to return. And to be fair, I can understand Mr. McGavin's concerns. He was known as a versatile actor and didn't want to be pigeonholed into what was regarded as a niche market. The idea of sci-fi fantasy horror series was not an original one, and been done to death in such long-running series as Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. But after some persuasion, he agreed. The role would often define McGavin and would dog him throughout the rest of his acting career, although he did appear in many other dramas, The Martian Chronicles and The X-Files, playing a character who's described as the original of the X-Files department. Chris Carter, creator of the X-Files, cited the Night Stalker series as his springboard for the idea of the X-Files after becoming hooked on the series in the 1970s, even to the point where he approached McGavin to reprise the role as Kolchak in the X-Files, and that would have been lovely to have seen. Although McGavin declined the offer, he did appear in a very Kolchak-esque role. This, I think, was a great shame, as the world of Kolchak would have dovetailed beautifully into the world of the X-Files. Oh well, never mind. The series went into production, 20 scripts were written, and much to McGavin's annoyance, they seemed to lurch from one monster story to another each week, one of the fears he had when he originally took on the role. Although this time his character had a full-time job with the independent news service and was based in Chicago, although it was shot in various locations in Los Angeles, interlaced of course with stock footage of Chicago. 2 other new characters were penned who shared the office with Kolchak, the dependable and resourceful elderly Miss Emily, and the pinstriped, straight-backed, by-the-book reporter Ron Updike, a character who Kolchak would take great pleasure in mocking or baiting. In fact, as the remaining scripts came in, McGavin often had to rewrite them, adding his own wit and byplay to his character. No mean task, as he was the series' lead actor, non-credited executive producer, and now script editor. Alas, this would all take his toll on McGavin, and after 20 episodes he asked to be released from his contract because of his disillusionment in the project. This series was broadcast on ABC between the tail end of 1974 into 75, but because of bad scheduling, the series failed to make any audience ratings dent, and so a second series was totally ruled out. And so the network thought the series had been destined for the scrap heap, long to be forgotten. But it wasn't until the late 1970s when it was shown in the late night slot, and it gave it somewhat of a cult status. The series ended up being sold internationally, as well as in the States. It wasn't until the early 1980s that Britain got to experience the Kolchak effect. I have fond memories watching my portable black and white television on a late Friday night on BBC Two. I loved the adventures of this hack reporter, uncovering ancient myths, resurrected witches, evil spirits trying to dominate the world, mixed in with a healthy helping of werewolves and weird creatures from the bowels of the earth guarding their nests. Guest stars were in abundance. Even Phil Silvers appears in one episode and invariably comes to a grisly end. But the episode I'm going to look at is simply named Werewolf, and you can guess it does exactly as it says on the tin. And before I get on to the episode, I just want to highlight something. I've always loved these opening credits. They grab the audience before the story's even begun. They create a special menace of their own. Kolchak would wander into an empty office, whistling a happy tune, pour himself a cup of coffee, fruitlessly attempt to throw his hat on the hat peg, and sit down at his desk. The whistling stops as he places a sheet of blank paper into the typewriter, and he bangs away on the keyboard. The theme music starts to build up in a sinister throng, and the audience sees Kolchak type the words "victim" and "monster" into his text. Sunlight disappears around the office, and the darkness envelops it. The clock stops, a fan stops rotating. The theme music reaches a crescendo. Kolchak spots something from the corner of his eye. Crash zoom to Kolchak's fearful gaze. Like some gumshoe detective, Kolchak delivers an opening monologue at the beginning of the show into his portable tape recorder. This portion of the story often starts with his conclusions, as if pre-preparing the audience for their fateful adventure. In this case, he sat with a giant liner in the background and explains about the fearful evils that exist in the world that transcends the borders of any country. A quick bit of trivia. The liner in question is named the Hanover in the episode, and is in fact the former liner of the Queen Mary, which at this point, since 1968, had been tied up at Long Beach, Los Angeles, where it was being used as a floating hotel. There is extensive location work. In fact, the regular INS office is the only standing set in this. Everything in this episode is on location, with plenty of night film, and that gives it its edge. The reality of what's going on the liner, you put a few flats together, it's not going to work. But if you can actually get on a boat, you're there. Well, the storyline says this is the last cruise of the Hanover before she's decommissioned, and that has been hired by a singles club for a 4-day voyage. The stock footage uses the boat at sea, I should say vessel, not boat, or I'll get a lot of bad press, was that of the French liner France, which was still in service in 2006, whereupon she'd been scrapped. Anyway, it starts with the INS regulars celebrating the approaching Christmas holidays. Asian flu has decimated the staff, and so they are making the most of the festive period. Tony Vincenzo, Kolchak's editor, is packed and ready to leave for Los Angeles, a Christmas cruise on the Hanover, where he's going to write a piece on the singles market. He is dressed as Santa and is uncomfortably in a good spirits, something observed by Kolchak. Whilst carols are being sung in the office, the phone rings and Kolchak eavesdrops on a call from the New York office. This is nothing out of the ordinary, as Kolchak always likes to be one step ahead of what's going on, so he knows in which direction to run. We're informed that Vincenzo is required to stay in the office as the auditors are coming, which results in Kolchak going for an all-expenses cruise that Vincenzo was hoping to be on. So what kind of bang do we get for our buck here? Well, it's not the best, but if I was to give you the best, you'd have high expectations for the rest of the episodes. So I think it's only fair that I should show you a mediocre. Okay, it's one of the worst episodes, so I'll give you that. But it's actually good fun. Kolchak rocks up at the the Hanover, and makes his way to his cabin. See various youngsters running around, all enjoying themselves. And he goes into his cabin and meets his roommate. It's quite interesting because it doesn't exactly say which age group we're looking at here. So when I thought young singles would be people in their early 20s, but it appears to be people in their mid-30s into their early 40s. It's quite an interesting bunch of people. This particular chap is quite gregarious in nature, wearing his loud Hawaiian shirts, and introduces Kolchak to his latest flame, shall we say, which turns out to be his ex-wife. He knows it's his ex-wife. It's just a complicated lifestyle they lead. Meanwhile, whilst that's all going on, a mysterious fedora-clad mystery man is being shown to his cabin. Now this, as you can imagine straight away, is the protagonist of the story. He's our werewolf incarnate. But as he's shown to his single, he's a man in his, late 30s, early 40s? Not the type of man who looks as though he would be coming on a singles cruise to look for love. And this is where the hole in the plot is slightly for me. If he's trying to keep a low profile, why has he come on a cruise for 4 days with a load of young people on board, and he's going to stick out like a sore thumb? That's the one thing that just doesn't sit well with me, to be fair. But he quite obviously sticks out. He's not interested in spending any time with the youngsters. Anyway, as the story goes along, they all go to dinner, and the moon rises. And as you can imagine, things get a little fraught in this man's cabin, and he sort of changes. Now, this is made by Universal. I emphasise Universal because they brought us the classic horror films like Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Wolfman. But this is 1970s Universal television, so it's going to be cheap. So don't expect the best effects. In fact, it looks like it's a bloke who's got a rug stuck on his face. However, he starts to run amok in the ship, throwing various members of crew downstairs, and he breaks into the wheelhouse and slaughters the crew in there. It doesn't hold back in being violent, and quite frankly, if you're a member of staff on that ship, you will be getting in the lifeboat and you'll be going, ta-da, I'm off. But no, the captain just breaks out the firearms and they go shooting. Kolchak finds out what's going on and sees bodies littered everywhere. He's told that there's been a fire hose breakage and they've been hit by the hose and they're slightly injured. And being the reporter that he is, sees things as slightly wrong. Anyway, so Kolchak is investigating more and gets slightly injured and gets knocked out whilst investigating a disturbance in the swimming pool. Or rather, the swimming pool is empty and it's very much an Art Deco swimming pool, which incidentally reopens this year to the public. They've restored it. Anyway, by the by. And he witnesses the werewolf, which is man, hairy hands, hairy face, going, "Urgh." It's not so much howling at the moon, of more gargling with some Andrew's liver salts. But nevertheless, he gets knocked out during the fracas and comes round in the infirmary, where he's one side of a partition, and he's listening to our protagonist, as this is now the morning, who is asking the medic for some hard drugs, basically to put him to sleep, so he sleeps all the way through the night and can't react to the moonlight. An injury on his arm that just will not heal. Presumably, this is where he got bit by a nasty werewolf. His backstory is that he used to work for NATO, and he was in an outpost up in Alaska when he and his 3 other workmates were attacked by something, and he was the only survivor, and he's gone missing. Well, as the story progresses, Kolchak makes the usual nuisance of himself, impersonates the captain's son, which really does irk the captain to the point that he threatens to clap him in irons. There is an underlying tension. It's the base under siege. There's no escape whatsoever. You could get in a lifeboat and you could row for shore, but it's going to be a blooming long way. So you're stuck on this boat, and somewhere there's a killer on board. So it's traditional, there's no escape. The crew are basically being decimated, and a few of the guests have become injured, shall we say. But they're enjoying themselves, they're drunk half the time, they don't know what's going on. Except for the inquisitive Kolchak, who realises that there's a werewolf on board. And he warns the captain, this is a werewolf. And the captain, as you can imagine, doesn't believe him. This is the 20th century. Werewolves are not real. Although he still can't explain why half of his staff have been decimated. Kolchak thinks, well, the only thing I can destroy it with is silver. So he taps up the friendly steward, who can get him anything for a few dollars, who provides him with silver-plated knives and forks. No good whatsoever. So he's told the only silver on board the ship is on the captain's dress uniform. So Kolchak basically breaks into the captain's cabin and takes all his silver buttons off of his tunic and goes back to his cabin, melts them down and puts them into a shotgun cartridges. And that evening, on the last full moon before it returns to port, he goes on the hunt for a werewolf. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but you can imagine what the ending's going to be. It's going to be Kolchak 1, Werewolf 0. But it's fun. This is fun. It's something that involves the audience. It takes you with him because of the character that Darren McGavin portrays and the way he gives it life on the screen. He's exuberant. He's funny. He doesn't like authority. He basically is flawed. He's an idiot. He can't keep his mouth shut. He rings up his boss and say, we got a werewolf on board. And can you imagine what his boss would say if your boss said, if you worked on a newspaper, yeah, I found a werewolf. Yeah, that's going to go down like a case of cold sick, because he's not covering the story that he sent. And this is a trait of Kolchak on a regular basis. However, there is drama, there's comic relief, and there is terror. And it's a lovely, lovely mixture, been put together and balanced very well. And of course, we have the cynical outro at the end of the story from Kolchak as he rounds the story up lovely before returning to his taxi and making a quick exit to return to Chicago. Because at the end of the day, nobody's ever going to believe him. A good summary of the series is a mixture of The X-Files, Doctor Who, 70s style, and Scooby-Doo. And I mean that in actually quite a praiseworthy way. Yeah, Scooby-Doo. As I say, I haven't picked the best of episodes, and I think if you give the best episode, then you have nothing to go and explore. I hope I giving you a little quick insight into the series. It's worth a look. It is available, if you want to try before you buy, it is available YouTube, but the price of the box set is under £15, and it's worth it for 20 episodes of fun. Don't expect high value production costs. It's the 1970s, but the acting is fun, a lot of fun, and it's something you could sit back and just watch and delve into. Give it a go. Tell us what you think. That's Kolchak.
The shipping line would only admit to having had a psychotic stowaway on board. The killer had fallen overboard after being cornered by ship's officers, so they said. All traces of Bernard Steiglitz vanished. His baggage was gone. His name could not be found in any passenger manifest. NATO officials claimed no such man had ever existed in their organization, and any attempt to publish a werewolf story about such a man would be met with the heaviest legal artillery. Vincenzo, always gun-shy, conveyed that message to me in no uncertain terms. So here the story sits, for good, I guess. No one but you and I know the real truth, the real story.
Thank you very much, Warren, for that.
Yes.
Warren's on the point of almost launching his own podcast, I
Yes.
understand. But
Yes.
more details of that to come soon, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But now, here's Paul and Nick looking at...
Shoestring.
Hello, the Archives people. It's me, Paul the Shy Yeti, Paul Chandler, and I've got Nick Goodman here. How are you doing, Nick?
Hello. I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. I've got yes. I've just defied a headache, which I'm pleased with.
Well, this time we're going to talk about a show that has been visited before by Martin on the show, but we wanted to kind of give our own sort of little thoughts. We're talking about Shoestring, which ran from 1979 to 1980 for 2 seasons and 21 episodes. Where do you want to start? Shall we explain to the listeners who may not know what it's about? It's
yes. I mean, if I remember, because I say, correct me of anything that I'm wrong, because you've seen it a lot more recently than I have. It's about a former computer programmer who's had a nervous breakdown, and he becomes a private eye. He takes cases on his radio show. It was who created it? I can't remember whether it was Robert Banks Stewart that created it.
Yeah, Robert Banks Stewart and Richard Harris.
Yes, not to be confused with that's Richard Harris, the British writer, not Richard Harris, the Irish actor.
Yes.
Robert Banks Stewart, of course, famous for his Doctor Who work and Avengers and Callan, and very prolific 60s, 70s, 80s TV writer. A very good, solid idea, I think. And Trevor Reeve was the lead, Eddie Shoestring, and as a completely trivial thing, my mum had a huge crush on him, and so I mean, we watched Shoestring from beginning to end. We did all 2 seasons, and I bought my mum a huge poster of him, and I think there was a time when my dad tried to grow a moustache to look like him. Shoestring was a hit in our household. I haven't actually. It's one of the few series that I kind of rated that I haven't actually got round to buying yet. But it's nice because it was a bit of a change from the Sweeney. It wasn't Sweeney, but it had a kind of a toughness about it. But it wasn't car chases and things like that. It was sort of more personal cases and a lot more personal into people's lives. And as far as I'm very intelligently done, entertaining, and I think it ran for the 2 seasons, as you say. But I think the reason it closed was Trevor Eve didn't want to do anymore.
It says that he kind of wanted to do more theatre work, and one of the interesting things is that the theme tune, which is quite memorable, is done by George Fenton.
And then it goes into a saxy, doesn't it?
It was done by George Fenton, and he also did the theme from the show Bergerac.
Yes,
and it's interesting to think, particularly as obviously I like Shoestring, but I've got more of a connection with Bergerac, and it's sort of weird to think that had Trevor Eve wanted to keep going, then maybe Bergerac would never have come about. But
almost certainly. I mean, I have to say you're absolutely right on that, because I remember Bergerac following that started in 1981 as it was so obvious because it was the same production team, same slot, Sunday evenings, and it was so obvious that it was a replacement for Shoestring that even at the age of 12, 13 I was at the time, I could see that Bergerac was a natural sort of successor to it. I've watched several Bergeracs with you, and I remember a lot when it was on. But for me, I always felt I was a little bit more for Shoestring. But then that was, I suppose, I don't know. Maybe
we used to go to the Channel Islands as well, so that gave me an extra connection. But there's actually a much smaller sort of team of regular cast. You've got Eddie, you've got Michael Medwin playing Don Satchley, who's the owner of Radio West.
That's right. Yes, I remember him. Yeah.
And I read on Wikipedia that. Once the series finished, Bristol's. Well, I don't think we actually said that it's set in Bristol, and one of the episodes I'm going to talk about is very near one of the major landmarks. But apparently, when the show finished, Bristol's first independent radio station was started under the name of Radio West.
Oh wow!
A year after it finished.
A word about the third. I think there was only about 3 regulars. That the lovely Liz Crowther, daughter of Leslie Crowther, was the secretary in it. She was lovely.
Yeah. I didn't realise that I was doing some research about her because I recognised her. She's in a sort of a 1987 episode of Bergerac, which is one of my favourites. So they obviously sort of kept in contact with the team, or the team would sort of. Yeah. Bergerac. It's more than coincidence that she was in Bergerac. I thought, but.
Jobs for the girls in this case. I think also going back to Trevor Eve, I have a feeling that as well as wanting to do theatre, I think he wasn't too happy about the direction it was going, or I could be wrong about that. But you could also tell Chris Boucher was involved because I think he was script editor, wasn't he? As Chris Boucher, I know he was. He did Bergerac.
Yes, he did. Yes, yeah.
I think he might have been Shoestring as well. I'm fairly certain he was. And there's Eddie Shoestring goes into a toy shop in, I think it's pretty well the last episode, whereas there's a storyline about 40 toys and the sort of health and safety. And he goes into one store and asks for a toy, and the guy there says, "Oh yeah, we got Blake Seven, Doctor Who," and I thought, yeah, that's Chris Boucher getting a plug-in for Blake Seven.
There's one other person who's listed as a main character, a character called Erica, who is Shoestring's landlady.
Right.
She's a barrister. She sometimes provides legal advice for the case he's investigating, and there's also a sort of hint of romance. But there's there are a few people. Sometimes the DJs who appear in the station recur, but most of these extra sporting cast are only in 3 or 4 episodes. Although there's one called Pete, who's a sound engineer, who's in 8 episodes. But,
the other thing that was interesting about the two characters, the Eddie Shoestring and Jim Bergerac, is you can see there was interest in kind of characters that are pulled back from the edge, because I believe it, and I think I've read this rather than actually remember it on the show, that Bergerac is a recovering alcoholic.
That's right. Yeah.
So you've got an interesting kind of backstory for both, because you've got one who's had a nervous breakdown, the others so they're coming to it a little damaged, and I think that's an interesting starting point for any character.
Yeah, and with Bergerac, it's sometimes returned to where people who want to discredit him know that's his weakness, and then spike his drink, or there is the episode that I rewatched of Shoestring today does hark back to his computer past. But some of the first episodes, I think Martin talked about Private Ear, which was the first episode, which was directed that was directed by Dougie Camfield. So a good start, and I think
that was deliberate. I think because I think they Robert Banks Stewart, of course, knew him from his Doctor Who days, and possibly even before, and wanted to get somebody really strong for directing the first episode. I was very pleased with Public Ear.
Yeah, that's the one with William Russell in, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And you can hear Video Kill the Radio Star in one scene. I remember, that's something I remember from it.
I think that's one of the problems they had when they were releasing it, was getting the clearance for the amount of music that was used in it. But for ages, the first season was available, and then it took a while for both seasons to be released. And so you've got episodes written by Robert Banks Stewart, Bob Baker.
Bristol, you see, it would have been right up his territory, because he was a Bristol-based.
Terence Feely. Now, I feel he has Avengers connections.
He does. Avengers, Callan. He was very experienced, I think UFO as well. He was very, very much the man of the moment.
I should tell you some of the other names of the writers in case I don't recognise them, but you do. Dave Humphreys, Peter Miller, Peter King, John Cruise.
John Cruise, Return of the Saint.
Yes,
and some of the he's I don't recognise the other guys.
Michael Armstrong, Jim Hawkins, Philip Martin. I presume that's Philip Martin who wrote Vengeance on Varos. Yeah,
almost certainly. Yeah,
and Dougie Camfield directs a second episode in the season as well. I don't recognise many of the directors. Certainly not as far as sort of being a lot of Bergerac has Doctor Who connections, and so does Shoestring to a certain extent, but maybe not as much. But
David Sibley from Pirate Planet's in one as a nasty,
and Toya is in the one that Philip Martin wrote,
and Chris Biggins. Toya and Chris Biggins play arch enemies. I remember that one very well.
Yeah. And in the second season, there's a That's interesting. I didn't even know about this. In the second season, there are 2 episodes written by somebody called William Hood. Now, William Hood is a pseudonym for Robert Holmes. And I don't think I knew that he'd written for Shoestring.
I wonder. I think because I've got his book. His biography. I think because with the Chris Boucher connection, I know he did some Bergeracs, and yes. I thought he wrote for Shoestring. I wonder why. He must have been under contract somewhere else. I wonder why he was under a pseudonym, because he certainly wasn't with Bergerac. Yeah,
Robert Banks Stewart writes 2 episodes of the second season, but whereas in the first season he had his name on the screen, apparently he had the pseudonym of Robert Bennett in the second season, and although one of those 2 was written by Paula Milne and Robert Banks Stewart, but still as Robert Bennett.
Paula Milne, that who they later, when she wrote Attack of the Cybermen, everybody thought she was a pseudonym. Maybe she is a pseudonym. I don't know, but that was, they said as the cyber leader David Banks said, either that or it was Eric in a good wig.
Chris Boucher, as you say, he writes the last episode of season 2, or the last episode of all.
I bet that's the toy shop one. Hence that was a good one, actually. It was a good one to go out on. But I actually like the idea of there only being 2 seasons. I like shows that go out on top. But there you go.
Dougie Canfield directed a third episode, in the second season. But the one I wanted to mention that I've watched this very day is the first episode of season 2. It's called Room with a View. Now the synopsis is: retired music hall singer Letty Ross witnesses a murder in an empty house opposite her flat, but when the police and her daughter are dismissive, she calls in Eddie. And I enjoyed this one. I mean, I watched it totally randomly because I don't think I'd seen it before, but I enjoyed it partly because you've got a sort of Eddie and Letty team up at one point. So you've got the old lady helping to investigate. That always appeals to me.
I always, yes. I mean, you and old ladies are like Laurel and Hardy. They are your calling card. You know, if there's an elderly aunt in something, it's written by Paul.
I literally wrote everything that ever is involved aunts.
Involving little old ladies, yes, absolutely.
Well, that's because rips his face off. I am a little old lady.
You are a little old lady.
I have been for the last 40 years. But, it's an interesting one because I found it interesting because the lady who plays this Letty Ross, she's an actress called Madeline Thomas, and I always find it interesting when you realise you're watching somebody who was born she was born in 1890, so she's literally a Victorian on screen. Yeah. And
it's like watching one of all my grandparents were Victorians. They were all born in 18 something or other, and I would, it's all, having done a lot of that sort of family research at the moment. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it is endlessly fascinating.
And also, when you look on her IMDb page, she died when she was 99 in 1989, and she apparently was 3 days away from her 100th birthday. But
bless her!
But that means that when she was acting in Shoestring, she was pushing 90, and you wouldn't have thought she was. But she was also in things like Shelley and Angels and Beasts. She was Bertha Lumley in Coronation Street. She was in the Dick Emery Show, Crown Court. That's one of Trebuchet's favourite shows. She was in The Frighteners, which is a compilation series that I've got recently.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's in loads of things, but she's actually looks like she's one of those people who probably when she was younger, she was in sort of like movies. She was in the Grove Family in 1955. But
that was one of the very first soaps.
Yeah, but you see her as an old lady character, but she was in How Green Was My Valley in 1960 and ITV television playhouses. And
I love it when they get old, really old, ones in I don't know, it's great.
But one of the funny, I was talking about a landmark in this episode. Clifton Suspension Bridge plays a part because there's a bit of a fight on the hills around that. I don't think that's an area of Bristol I've ever really been to, because I guess you probably need to have a car to go out that way, really.
My then girl, as you know, I in the early 90s I was courting in Bristol, and all these series in Bristol that I suddenly came into sharp focus because I was spending sort of there twice weekly, and she showed me some missing lights in the Clifton Suspension Bridge. And she said apparently her dad accidentally drove straight into those and knocked them out. I thought to myself, I would be absolutely wetting myself because, heights and things like that. I'm not too good with heights. And
it looks like it would have been a good Sutton Park location.
Yeah, but, because you did early Sutton Park in Bristol,
yeah. But there's another face I recognised. Oscar James plays sort of
one of the original EastEnders.
Yes, yeah. Although it looks like he's had quite a busy career going right back to the 60s, with all sorts of characters. The thing that was the cameo that was the most surprising, considering what a big part he's played in some Doctor Who stories, was that Christopher Benjamin appears, literally in a 2 or 3 minute scene where Shoestring has to go onto a rooftop and talk to somebody, get some advice, and this guy's, played by Christopher Benjamin, is just happily working up on this really high level, and Shoestring's petrified. And you can see that's filmed near Clifton Suspension Bridge as well.
Again, you've got I really like the idea of a vulnerable hero. Someone who isn't brave with heights and things like that. I think that really makes things like that for me, and what makes the series real.
But I was surprised that Christopher Benjamin was there just for that scene. That's literally the only scene he was.
You expect to get more for your money with Chris Benjamin, don't you? Right?
But it was an interesting sort of episode. Nice episode to start the second season on. Kept me sort of because you weren't sure who was the person behind the murder, and also the retired musical singer, that she lives in a flat owned by her children, who quite clearly would rather she had died
was
or in a home or whatever, so that they could sell the place. So that makes you sort of I think that makes Eddie
instantly
more
puts you on,
and makes Eddie more protective as well, wanting to I need to get watching more of these episodes.
They are good. Here's me saying that when I haven't actually even got it on DVD, but it's a quality series, I remember that much.
But anyway, I think that's all I want to say about Shoestring this time, but thought it would be just nice to dip into another episode that we haven't talked about, and who knows, maybe it'll become a series that different members of the Round the Archives team dip into and review their own episodes.
Or give their 2 penneth on Shoestring, yes.
Anyway, thanks Nick, and thanks listeners.
Pleasure.
And I'll hand you back to Andrew and Lisa. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Nick.
Yes.
Well, only one more article to go.
Yes.
So we'll round this issue off with you and me looking at
Dial 999. When in London, that's what you do to call the police. I know. I'm a policeman from Canada attached to Scotland Yard. My name's Mike Maguire.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Dial 999.
Yes, I'll dial 999.
I've fallen asleep by then. But this is almost like a sequel to our David Nixon article in that you discovered Dial 999 through your ABC discs.
Yes.
Haven't you?
Yes.
So we've got 4 episodes.
4 episodes. Though it wasn't known to other people. It's just not something I've ever come across before. So.
And it's a series from the late 50s.
Yes.
Starring Robert Beatty.
Yes.
And the episode we're going to look at is one starring William Hartnell, Bill Fraser, and a bit of Patrick Troughton.
A bit of Patrick Troughton.
Not starring a bit of Patrick Troughton.
It's all of Patrick Troughton.
He doesn't just like put his leg in or something
it's just
like that.
He's not in it for very long, and he's not even on the cast
He doesn't
list.
have a huge part.
No.
Right. But it's a series that is very difficult to find any information about.
Yes.
There's nothing on Wikipedia about it.
No.
IMDb does have it listed, but even the transmission dates are vague in some cases, and even more so in the episode we're going to look at.
Yes.
Because the episode comes in a nice little box.
Obviously.
And if you look on the back of the box, it says Dial 999, 50,000 hands, 7th of December 1963.
Yes.
But that's when Doctor Who was like running.
Yes, Doctor Who had been on
for a few weeks.
About 3 weeks.
Yeah. If you look inside, it says the 23rd of November. That's suspicious.
Yes.
1958.
Yes.
But if you look on IMDb, it just says episode transmitted 1959.
No.
Yes. With no date at all.
No.
So this is good, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'll read you the blurb. It says a factory safe is robbed and one of the criminals accidentally shot. Maguire takes unusual steps to run the crooks to earth.
Yeah. I will point out he's shot by himself.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Written by Ian Greaves, directed by Terence Fisher.
Yes.
So Robert Beatty is Detective Inspector Mike Maguire.
Yes, he's a Canadian policeman.
He's a mounted policeman.
No, he's not a mounted policeman. He's a Canadian policeman. Not all Canadian policemen are mounted, I don't think. And
it depends how lucky they are.
He's on attachment to Scotland Yard to learn how English policemen do their jobs.
Although by this point he's county constabulary.
Yes.
He's been like shifted off.
Basically, I think they ran out of ideas for London.
London-based
and they were like,
stories.
"Oh, what do we do? Let's send him off to Hertfordshire,
where hurricanes hardly ever happen, apparently."
Okay, so yeah.
But I've written some notes. We'll go through the notes, then we'll talk about Dial 999. How many nines? Lots of nines, generally.
Yes.
I have to ask, did you ever dial 999 in real life?
Not intentionally. No, I think my phone once dialed 999 because the problem with smartphones is if you've got it in your bag or your pocket and it's unlocked, you can accidentally dial people. And I think it did once dial 999, and I think I cut it off and wasn't brave enough to tell them I dialed it by accident. They say if you do it, you're supposed to say to them, "I'm really sorry, I've dialed you by accident."
Yeah. I mean, it's a late 50s series, and the 999 number wasn't available until 1937.
Yes.
And only in London. It's only later it became available in other cities and later the whole of the UK.
So presumably before that, if you had an emergency, you just had to go and find a policeman.
Yeah.
Or a police box, maybe.
I suppose so.
Yeah. And the policeman would blow his whistle.
But we've had some discussion about why is it 999, not 111, because that would be quicker.
Yeah.
Because, we laugh at the title sequence taking ages to actually do it.
Well, it does take ages. It's like you dial 999. You don't do it with like big gaps in between.
But it's the dial going round.
Yeah.
But if it was 111, apparently, like overhead cables, if they sort of knocked together or something like that, or got stray signals on them, you might get a blip on the line, which might give you a 111. So they might get like weird calls
silent
calls from like birds or leaves or something like that. And it was in the days of push button telephones,
button A.
Yeah, button A and button B.
Yeah.
And to dial the operator, you could dial 0.
Yeah.
So you could fudge the equipment so that you could make 9 a free number as well as 0 because it was just next to it.
Yeah.
So the idea was like you could find it in the dark by putting your middle finger in the 0 because there's a little stop there, and then you put your index finger next to it, and that's the 9. Because what was it you said? Who was it? Their kids were amazed at rotary phones.
When we were at the Museum of London and they had dial phones, rotary phones there, and my godson and his younger brother were amazed that you had to go to all the effort of turning the dial all the way round.
Yeah.
Because they'd only ever seen a push-button phone.
Okay, they spent ages playing with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's late 50s. The music is a harmonica, basically.
Yes.
Is it Tommy Riley?
Yes.
Whoever Tommy Riley
Something
is.
like that. Presumably somebody knows of him. But,
yeah. But we open with Bill Fraser lurking in a hat.
Outside a gate.
He's not lurking in a hat.
No, he's wearing a hat.
He's wearing a hat. Yeah. It'd be a big hat. And there's a gunshot.
There is a gunshot.
Gunshots.
Yeah.
And we cut to inside, and there's a sort of... Is he a sort of watchman?
Yes.
Who sort of spark out.
Yeah.
And somehow Hartnell's managed to not shoot the bloke, but himself.
Yeah, I think there was a tussle for the gun.
A tussle.
Yes.
I'm trying to imagine Hartnell and that bloke having a tussle.
Yes.
And he's clearly the most incompetent burglar in the world as he shot himself.
It's very odd to see. I mean, because obviously William Hartnell, before he does Doctor Who, is known for playing sergeant majors and hard men and criminals. But I've never seen him in that kind of part. So it's really odd to see him playing this kind of part. And I mean, at this point, he's only 50 years old.
Yeah,
but he looks older.
Yeah. Oddly, I've just sort of noticed that Hartnell's in the very first episode.
Oh, okay.
The Killing Job, written by Ted Willis, no less, and directed by Alvin Rakoff, or Rakoff, wherever you say it. So the thing about Hartnell being happy that Robert Beatty was in the 10th Planet, I thought it was just this episode, but clearly they go back even further.
Even further, yeah.
So yeah, that's rather nice. But yeah, so Hartnell shot himself, and he can't walk. And I like to think we can't go back on the train like we were going to.
Yeah, they
or
go
something.
back on the train.
Yeah.
Like, that's just...
Yeah, that's weird.
That's like a slow getaway.
Well, there's a lot of slow getaways in this. So, Bill Fraser dials 999.
He does.
The first time it happens in the episode.
And calls an ambulance.
And calls for an ambulance. They're at United Plastics, which just made me think of Autons.
Yes.
I'm desperately trying to get Doctor Who links. So, and an old ambulance turns up, ringing its bell.
It's not an old ambulance. It's probably a contemporary ambulance.
Yeah. 2 ambulance men turn up. Bill Fraser helps to get Hartnell out into the ambulance, whilst the other bloke stays behind with the night watchman. You said the bloke was covered in chalk or something.
Yeah, there's because obviously at this point they're ambulance men. They're not paramedics. And so they're not really... They can do a little bit of first aid.
Yeah.
But anything above that... They're sort of the equivalent of Godfrey, in a way. Because he's got... If you notice, he's got a first aid box.
And some ointment for wasp stings.
Yeah. So... Yeah, but I don't know. One of them's leant against something, and there's like a white substance.
Perhaps
on
they were
his
on a
back.
smoke break and they were leaning against a wall or something, whistling. So Hartnell's in the ambulance now, and the other ambulance man goes back inside to help his mate, leaving Bill Fraser alone, which is always a bad idea.
Yes.
So Bill Fraser gets in the ambulance, which is from Hertfordshire, because it says on the side. And
drives it away.
And I put medium speed getaway.
It's the noisiest ambulance ever as well.
Yeah?
It's got... The engine's really loud.
Does it need a service?
Well, I think it's just general for cars then. You forget how loud cars used to be.
So the ambulance men now dial 999 and ask for...
The police.
Police! Maguire gives some blurb about after 6 months of duty, he's been carted off.
They've sent him away.
Yeah.
He's too annoying.
So Robert Beatty turns up and talks to the watchman, who describes Hartnell as the little one.
The little one, yes.
Yeah, which is amusing, considering Troughton's
probably
along later.
Yeah.
And apparently there was £9,000 in the safe.
Goodness me. Why is it called 50,000 hands then? I don't get that.
Because later on it's 25,000 people.
Yeah.
And they've got 2 hands each.
Sorry.
Although I'll discuss that when we get to it.
Okay.
There's got to be at least one armed person in the town, hasn't it?
Probably.
And he asked for a description. And I was of the 2 people, and I just wish he'd said, "Well, one of them looks like Bill Fraser, and the other's the dead spit for William Hartnell." But hey, because that's the thing in these universes.
No, these people
never exist, do they? So Bill Fraser drives the ambulance off into a field.
Yeah. No, into a road.
Well, yeah.
A track.
Yeah, and then into a field, into some bushes, basically.
Well, no, it's still on the road.
Yeah, all right, okay. And Hartnell says, get a donkey. Get a donkey. He's going to make an escape. Now get a doctor. Now, the reason I said that, because I'd then written LNK 102, so I read that as donkey. LNK 102 is the number of the ambulance.
That'd be a really slow getaway on a donkey, wouldn't it?
So he puts Hartnell under a blanket and sticks him in a bush, basically.
Leaves him.
Yeah.
I'm going to get my car.
Yeah, off to get his car. Now, Scotland Yard don't have the prints on record because they found some prints on the scene.
Yes, they found some prints on the desk and safe and stuff.
But a random RAC man has seen the ambulance.
Yes. Oh, and there's a great bit with the RAC man later, isn't there?
Yeah. We'll say that. So Troughton's sort of lurking about, isn't he?
He's asleep in the field.
Yeah.
Because he's a gentleman of the road.
What do you think of his costume? It's remarkably ragged, isn't it?
It's very ragged. Yeah.
So he's just sort of watching, isn't he?
Yeah.
Lurking. Bill Fraser returns in his car and then picks up Hartnell. TXU 142 is his car.
Yes.
So yeah, I've got all these written down. The police car is MXC 334.
Okay.
So there you go. And yeah, they sort of talk to the RAC man.
Yes.
Who sort of gesticulates.
He salutes.
Yeah.
Because didn't they used to salute?
Yeah, they had to. Yeah.
Because there used to be a television programme called The Last Salute about the RAC and the AA and the sort of rivalries.
Yeah. Troughton's talking to himself, isn't
he?
Saying he's going to sleep in style tonight.
Yeah, because he's going to steal some blankets and a pillow.
And then he gets in the ambulance because he hears them coming, doesn't he? And he does things like, "I didn't mean no harm, governor."
Yeah.
He does his sort of rough
"Weren't me,
voice,
governor?
doesn't he? Yeah.
I wasn't going to steal nothing."
He tells them about Hartnell, but you don't know when it happened because he don't have a watch.
No.
So meanwhile, Bill Fraser's gone home to his wife. Yes. It's a very nice house, isn't it?
It's quite a nice house. Well, obviously crime pays.
Crime plays, yeah. Hartnell's been shoved in the garage, hasn't he?
In the garage on like a table of some kind, like a trestle table or a wallpapering table or something.
They're going to do the wallpaper routine in a minute, like Bruce Forsyth. So Hartnell's sort of reclining, isn't he? And he's got quite an easy part, really, Hartnell. He just gets to lie down a lot.
Lie down, yeah.
So Bill Fraser goes off again, doesn't he?
Yes,
to get something for the pain.
He's in agony.
Yeah. And they throw a cordon around the area.
Yes.
And they've got some maps.
Around Letchworth.
With little flags,
yes.
Don't they? So yeah, we go off to the hospital. And Bill Fraser's breaking glass, isn't he? Getting the drugs. Is a dispensary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which seems to have a load of enormous test tubes in it for some reason. I don't know why, to make it look sciencey, I suppose.
Yeah.
So a nurse comes in, and I put she is nobbled by Bill Fraser.
Yes.
But it turns out she's rather more than nobbled, isn't she?
Yes, he kills her.
Somehow he managed to strangle her.
Yeah. Well, because it's shot, you can see his back, and so you can't see her. All you see is her arm.
Yeah.
So, and he has got his hands around her neck.
Yeah.
So I guess he does strangle her, yeah. But you don't see it.
So Bill Fraser goes off through the door, like you do. And there's some jaunty harmonica music.
Yeah, it's very jaunty music because he just killed somebody.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's the advert break, is it?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. And I said to you, rewind it when we come back in because the police car zooms off.
Yeah.
But outside what I presume is meant to be the police station, there's a sign up, isn't there?
Yes.
There's a notice board. There's a picture of a policeman saying there's no better job.
Yes, and he appears to be holding up what I assume is a warrant card.
Yeah.
But you can't read it because it's too blurry.
And I thought this is real sort of peak sort of Dixon and Doc Green period, isn't it? So yeah, they're sort of advertising the police, I suppose. But yeah, it turns out there's been a murder at the hospital. A nurse was strangulated. Back at Bill Fraser's house, he gives Hartnell a jab, doesn't he?
Does.
Because apparently he was a medical orderly grade 1. That was lucky.
Yeah.
I just imagine him like making a real sort of fist up of.
Yeah, hash a bit.
Is that a phrase? A fist up? I don't know. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a phrase.
So the matron says a hypodermic and a morphia is missing. So could it be a drug addict? Or could it just be somebody in pain? But there are some prints on the cabinet, aren't there?
No, on the door.
On the door handle.
And technically on the phone.
Yeah.
Because the nurse picks the phone up and he replaces the handset.
Yeah. I like Bill Fraser's rather morbid thing that there's plenty of room in the garden to put Hartnell if they need to.
If he dies.
Yeah. The prints they get at the hospital are different to the prints that they found on site
at the factory and in the ambulance.
Yeah. So there was this thing about one of them keeps his hands in his pockets all the time, which isn't actually true. He
wears gloves.
Or just wears gloves. Yeah. There is that. I just like the idea of being a robber with your hands in your pockets all the time. You know, where do you want to put me the money? And you just nod in where to put it. So it'll take a Houdini to wriggle out of their cordon, apparently. I'm not sure about that.
Yes.
Robert Beatty says, why don't they fingerprint the entire town? 25,000 people. So yeah, as you said, hence the name 50,000 hands. Yeah. But it's really got to be something like 24,973 or something.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a few people that don't have
both hands.
Yeah. Because the average number of hands a person's got across the world is less than 2.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you've got 2 hands, you're actually not average. If you think about it mathematically,
right.
They can't force them to do it. It would be an unusual step, and then cut to a load of people in queues.
Yes.
I don't know whether they're just like random bits of queuing that they filmed or what.
Well, there's one bit where it definitely looks like they filmed it specifically.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole queuing bit, because there's quite a lot of people, and I can't imagine you'd get that many people together just for that shot, but maybe they did.
I don't know, but yeah, suddenly they've got an awful lot of extras, haven't they? Just for a couple of shots. But the chief constable pleads for cooperation, doesn't he? And the police will call on houses to do it if you can't come in.
Yes. So anybody that doesn't go to one of the centres gets a call from a policeman.
Yeah. And I said, what is the time scale of all this?
Yeah. It's not clear, is it?
Because it seems to be organised extremely quickly.
Well, obviously, they were more efficient in the 50s.
But a policeman comes to Bill Fraser's house and he realises he had one glove off to open the cabinet.
Yeah.
And
he's touched the door.
And he's touched things. So they've got his prints. But there's still a way out. So now they're mopping up the invalids and malingerers. The phrase malingerer just makes me think of Tony Hancock.
All right, okay.
Because when he's thinking he's suffering from malingery. Yeah. But yeah, so the policeman calls on Mrs. Bingham, who is Bill Fraser's
wife.
Mrs.
Yes.
And Hartnell's on the sofa covered in a
tartan blanket.
He asked for a tartan blanket and he got both. Yeah, that's an old Barry Cryer joke.
Okay.
So they take her prints.
Yeah.
And then they take Hartnell's prints. Bill Fraser sort of is he in the bog looking in?
I think he's just in another room. I don't think it's the bathroom. I think it's like the dining room.
It's not an ensuite, is it? No.
Don't be silly.
Yeah, the prints eventually match, don't they?
Well, no, the prints they take don't match the hospital, but they do match the factory.
Factory ones, that's right. Yes. So off they toddle to the house because they realise like Hartnell had one glove off.
Yeah. He's touched stuff.
So everybody's really a bit rubbish at this.
They are, yeah. They go in wearing gloves, and then after a while they get hot and take them off.
Like you do,
yeah.
So they'll come looking here, realises Bill Fraser. So the police arrive.
Yeah. And leave the car in the middle of the road.
Yeah. So Bill Fraser legs it to the garage, doesn't he?
Yes, he goes to the garage.
Gets in his car and smashes through the doors.
Yeah, making as much noise as possible. Why didn't he open the garage doors quietly?
And there's about 3 policemen outside. Yeah. And you said it turns into real Keystone Cops.
Yeah, because they all sort of have to leap out of the way.
One puts his hands up in the hope that will stop Bill Fraser, but no. So, yeah, they get the bell out now, don't they, and go ding-a-ling-a-ling. And then there's a random jumping man. Is he coming out of a pub or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Bill Fraser nearly gets him.
Yeah,
and he does a
to
real
run
proper
back.
bouncy leap, doesn't he? But then the police car goes past and he's learnt his lesson.
Yes, he stands and waits.
Yeah. So Bill Fraser drives off down to some random quarry, doesn't he? I don't know where he thinks he's going to go.
Yeah, I think he just panics.
He's going to hide under some gravel or something. Have his little eyes just looking over the top like a cartoon. So he reaches for his gun, doesn't he?
He does.
And Robert Beatty throws a small handful of gravel at him.
His face.
And
then dives at him.
Which overpowers him.
No, and then dives at him, and then they roll down the hill.
In pure action by Havoc.
Which I assume is stuntmen because it's shot from quite a distance.
Yeah.
And there's dust.
Yeah. But then the man on the harmonicas come along for the ride because he starts up again, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah.
Come on, you, let's go. And then cut to Robert Beatty and his mate standing outside a fire, isn't it?
It's like a furnace, I guess. Yeah.
And they're burning 24,999 sets of prints.
Yeah. Well, technically, they're burning 98 because they need the Hartnell's prints and they need Bill Fraser's prints, and they probably 97.
Yes, I know. The sums don't quite make sense, but they go on about how they were glad for the public cooperation, as without it any police force is licked.
Yes.
And then you get a bit more harmonica. There you go. But I think that was quite fun, don't you?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's definitely not to be taken seriously. Yeah. It's just a bit of sort of.
But you like
fun.
These sort of late 50s ones, don't you? Because you were saying about Scotland Yard as well.
Yes.
Because one of those we watched had John LeMage in, didn't they?
It did.
Yeah.
It did. Actually doing some proper acting. Yeah. So.
But let's briefly look at the other ones we've got. So we got Robbery with Violence.
Yes.
I just want to see if the dates match on this one now. Let's have a look. Robert Beatty stars as Detective Inspector Maguire, a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. See, he was mounted.
Well, yeah, that's what the force is called.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that every single
He doesn't like.
He doesn't turn up in a red coat and a funny hat.
Funny
and
hat.
a horse. I mean, that would be good, but yeah.
Maguire struggles to find leads as he investigates an armed robbery on a
pawn shop.
I nearly said prawn shop. A pawn shop in which a passerby was shot and killed.
Yeah. No one's quite. They actually film on a proper street for that one.
Yeah, that's written by Peter Yeldham, Alvin Rakoff directing. Got Philip Latham in it.
Yes.
Where was the location of that, you said?
They film on a street for the bits where the robbers escape, and there are people sort of watching in the background. So
I mean, it's interesting with a lot of these how much you just get the general public lurking and watching. Yeah. So another one we've got is Death Ride.
Yeah.
James Armstrong is suspected of murdering his nagging wife. Maguire is put on the case, but during his investigation, someone tries to run him over.
Yeah, that's not what I would have based that episode around, because that's one small scene.
Yeah. Patrick Barr and Clive Morton are in that.
Yes.
Isn't Clive Morton the...
Clive Morton's the murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah, he basically tampers with the brakes on the car because his wife drives too fast anyway. And she sort of goes around the corner and the car crashes.
Yeah.
But he's going to run off with his secretary, and then there's this bit towards the end where, because he's got a motor launch which he's going to escape on, but his secretary's got too much luggage, and he's like, leave the luggage, and then he ends up leaving her and going off on his motor launch, and then I think he ends up falling off the boat.
Then he falls off and drowns.
No, he doesn't drown. I don't think he's sort of floating around with his life jacket on or whatever. But yeah, it's extremely odd.
And then the other one we've got, a crook is caught smuggling counterfeiting plates into the country. Maguire sees an opportunity to catch the entire gang.
Yeah, that one actually finishes up at Battersea Fairground.
Because doesn't he try and pass himself off as a
what he does is because the guy that comes in, is American, and because he's Canadian and nobody can tell the difference between Americans and Canadians, he basically takes his place and takes the counterfeiting plates to the gang and to try and catch them. But then they get a call from the guy that sent him from New York, and it all goes a little bit.
Yeah, they realise
it's not him.
But yeah, you said there's some nice filming, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it all ends up at Battersea Fun Fair.
And they go on some rides,
and they
don't
go on
they?
some rides, and it's extraordinary because there are people there. They obviously haven't closed it off. They've done it while it's open, and it's. But
yeah, I mean, it's difficult to film at places like that because there's that Z cars at the fair as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting when you try and do those sort of things.
Yeah, because you have to work around the general public.
Yeah.
Because normally you don't have the resources to shut the area off. So, and also it makes it look more normal if there are people around, and they're not. You don't have to pay them. So
that's the 4 episodes we've got.
Yes.
But when's the whole lot coming out?
The box set of the entire series is coming out on, I think it's the 26th of April.
Oh.
From Network. I have already pre-ordered it.
Yeah.
And we will actually be able to find out a bit more when things were shown, because obviously Network releases always say when the episode was transmitted. So it will give you more information than you have now.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, just looking at the sort of guest cast list, there's some very good names in there. So yeah, quite looking forward to this. I mean, yeah, they're quite quick and cheerful.
Yes, they're about sort of 25 minutes long.
Yeah.
So
they don't outstay their welcome.
No.
That's the thing. I mean, yeah, they're perhaps not the most hard hitting of things, maybe.
No, but they do deal with serious subjects.
Yeah.
Because the robbery with violence one, it's just a random passerby who tries to help, and he ends up getting killed.
Yeah.
So there are. I mean, it's not really grim, but there are bits of it that are quite serious. And I just think it's really interesting because it gives you a chance to look at a world that no longer exists.
Yeah.
The sort of how many people are out on the streets and how many cars are there. Because the thing about Scotland Yard is that which is about the same time, it's slightly earlier in fact, sometimes when they're driving around, it's amazing how few cars there are on the road.
Yeah, it's all very quiet, isn't it?
Yeah. And, it's such a big difference to now. So, yeah, it's in a way, it's almost a historical drama because it's showing you something that, as I say, that is no longer there.
Yeah, that's true. How things that were once contemporary now become historical documents. So, yeah. But there you go. There's Dial 999.
Mm-hmm.
So there we are. That's the episode in the can. Mm-hmm. So we'll say thank you very much for listening again.
Yes. Hope you've enjoyed it.
We'll be back again with episode 59.
Yes, we're getting perilously close to 60.
Oh, the big 60. Yes. Oh dear, better think about that soon then.
Yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was episode 58 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Bob Fischer, Andrew T. Smith, Warren Cummings, Nick Goodman and Paul Chandler.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The script for Dial 999, 50,000 Hands was by Ian Greaves.
In charge of production was Harry Allen Towers.
Right, so that's the episode finished.
Yes.
And there's a fair bit in the can.
Mm-hmm.
all ready for forthcoming stuff.
Yes.
I'll do that again because that was awful. And I was grumbling. Many thanks to the Summer Winos for that.
And it's a very good book. It's highly recommended.
Well, I've been in the bath with it several times, which is always a good sign of quality.
Yes.
In fact, it's even encouraged me to start reading the last of the Summer Wine novel, The Moonbed. Do that again.
Is that all right, do you reckon?
I think so, yeah.
Not going to do that any better, are we?
No.